You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy.
On the show, we are discussing the up-and-coming Irish referendums, which will be on International Day on the 8th of March in 2024. Irish citizens will be asked to vote on two referendums to change our constitution. The first referendum concerns the concept of family in the constitution. The second referendum proposes to delete an existing part of the constitution and insert new texts providing recognition for care provided by the family members to each other. We had two separate votes on whether we wish to make the proposed changes to the current text of Article 41 of the Constitution, Family Amendment. The Article 41.1.1, the state recognises the family as a natural, primary and fundamental unit of society and as a moral institution processing inalienable and irrespectable rights antecedent and superior to all positive law. In Article 41.3.1, the state pledges itself to guard with special care the institution of marriage, on which the family is founded, and to protect it against attack. The Constitution currently recognises that family unit in society and protects the family founded on marriage. The proposal. In this amendment, there will be one vote for two proposed changes. The proposal involves the insertion of an additional text to Article 41.1.1 and the deletion of a text in Article 41.3.1. These proposed changes are shown below. Proposal to the changes. In 41.1, the state recognises the family, whether founded on marriage or other durable relationships, as the natural, primary and fundamental unit group of society, as a moral institution processing inalienable and irrespectable rights ascendant to superior to above law. The proposed changes to Article 41.3.1 by deleting text shown to the line. The state pledges itself to guard with special care the institution of marriage on which this family is founded, to protect it against attack. The legal effects of yes and no. If the majority will vote yes, then the Constitution will change. The Constitution protection of family will be given to both the family based on marriage and the family founded on other durable relationships. The family founded on marriage means that a unit based on marriage between two people without distinction as to their sex. The family founded on durable relationships means a family based on different types of committed and continuing relationships other than marriage. So different types of family units would have the same constitutional rights and protections. The institution of marriage will continue to be recognised as an institution that the state must guard with special care and protect the attack. So our guests tonight to talk about and discuss the constitutional and the referendum is Deputy Peadar Tóibín, founder and leader of the Aontú political party. Helen Duignan is the spokeswoman for the Irish Women's Lobby. She is a graduate of Russian Theology in Trinity College Dublin in 1992 and holds a master's in journalism from DCU in 1996. She lived and worked in Russia in the 1990s before returning to work in Ireland in the NGO sector, and most recently with Amnesty International. In 2018, she retained as an interior architect and joined the Irish Women's Lobby in 2021. The founders of the Irish Women's Lobby recognise a clear disconnect between the real concerns of Irish women and the public representations of those concerned in the media and the NGO sectors. The Irish Women's Lobby was established as an alternative voice for many women denied political and media representation. The IWL seeks to amplify the voices of women and girls impacted by law and practices that are in direct conflict with their rights and interests. And Sabine Devine will be joining us. Sabine is a women's rights and disabilities activist. Sabine worked with the Dublin Pride in 2013 as an events director and also worked with elderly and served in the country and as a reserve in the Defence Forces Civil Defence. You are all very, very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup tonight. A very topical subject, a
Absolutely.
very sensitive subject, but again, also a topic that not very many citizens of Ireland are fully aware of what's happening.
And Peadar Tóibín, you're the leader of Aontú. As before that, Roisin, she went through it in a lot of detail. What is proposed? What position will your party be advocating for on the referendum on the 8th of March?
Yeah, so we're looking for a no vote in both referendums. We believe that the Constitution is a fundamental legal document. It contains the core rights of citizens, and it also details the responsibilities of the state. It's not a location for what I would call empty virtue signaling by the government. And one of the problems I have with these amendments is I think that they're extremely poorly written. I think the language is confused, it's unclear, and the legal consequences are potentially far-reaching in terms of social welfare, taxation, succession, migration, family law, etc. We simply don't know. I do believe that we should have probably updated the language within the Constitution, that the language it was archaic in many ways, but we could have done it without actually deleting core elements of the Constitution. So, I would be opposed to the deletion of the word woman from the Constitution. We've already seen the government try to delete it from legislation, from healthcare, and delete the word woman from wider society. And I think women have fought so long and so hard to achieve their rights within the law and within the Constitution, that the idea that the word woman will be deleted from the Constitution, I think is absolutely wrong. And also in terms of care, I just think that we're living at a time where care has actually never been as devalued as it is at the moment. So we know that childcare is closing at the moment. Nursing homes are closing. Children are being put into state care that is unregulated currently by the government. And this constitutional amendment offers no material benefits to people who are carers or who are in need of care. No enforceable material rights are in this particular amendment. In actual fact, I think the government, by this amendment, are insulating themselves from responsibilities towards care as well. And in terms of care, I will say, like in my own constituency, I meet mother and fathers who are getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, they're dropping their kids off at a creche or a childcare facility at 7. They're commuting for an hour and a half. They're doing 9 hours work that day. They're doing everything in reverse in the evening time. They hardly get to spend any time with their children, and they don't have the choice to be able to spend time with their children as they would want to. The government are saying in a lot of their preambles around this that a woman's place is wherever she wants it to be. And we fully agree with that sentence. But the truth is, because of the government's policies on rent and on mortgages, for example, people can't be where they want to be because they are actually on an economic treadmill that's forcing them into, such levels of work, such levels of commuting hell, etc. So, in these terms, that constitutional amendment that the government are proposing doesn't actually add any rights to them. In actual fact, actually reduces the rights that the current article within the Constitution gives to mothers currently. I would have liked to see potentially, that mothers and fathers are recognised potentially, and to make sure that it's more balanced in that regard.
And the term durable relationship, Peadar, that is very, very vague and very, very open to interpretation. If I asked 10 people the same question, I would get 10 different answers. As you mentioned earlier on, that term alone has wide-reaching consequences.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Like on one level, I was thinking that, if you asked an intercert or junior cert, I should say, showing my age there, a junior cert class to write a constitutional amendment, and they came back with something like this, you would say, well, fair play, that's not too bad. But we couldn't obviously put that into the constitution because nobody really knows what it means. And then I'm thinking at the back of my head, well, maybe the government rather that it doesn't know what it means, because not defining something gives far more opportunity to make decisions in the future that are unforeseen decisions. And remember, this government don't like to define things. So in the hate speech bill, they wouldn't define what hate meant. They wouldn't define what gender meant, for example. And that's a very dangerous thing. People in a democracy should know what they're voting for, and then that should be put into the law. The minister has said that, well, a judge will decide in future what durable means, but that's reverse democracy. That's basically the judge deciding what the law is. We've had Mary Baker states, she's obviously the chairperson of the Referendum Commission, and she stated that a durable relationship could be that a person who gets a wedding invite together, or gets a Christmas card posted to them together. So that is a situation where it's so broad, it's impossible to define what it is, and that can have serious consequences. And actually, where durable relations or relationships appears before in the Irish legal system is in a case where Justice Mary Baker was in charge, and that was an immigration case. And actually, in that case, the context of that was in relation to an intimate or a romantic or a sexual relationship. And the government are actually selling this amendment to say that single parents will be now recognized by this. But actually, they may not be recognized by this, because under the European directive and in previous court cases within the system, the durable relationship did not mean a family with a single parent. And I will say this, there's so many families headed by a single mother or father who do phenomenal jobs in raising their children, and this constitutional amendment does nothing for them. So, I would say the first responsibility for anybody to vote yes in a constitutional amendment will be to know what they're actually voting on. And that's very clearly not the case in this situation. I just can't believe the government has been so useless in terms of defining what exactly they want to put into the Constitution.
And Helen, a spokeswoman for the Irish Women's Lobby, what is your position, and what is it, what are your major concerns about this referendum?
Well, the Irish Women's Lobby would echo a lot of what Peadar said there, calling for a no vote on both amendments. Everything that Peadar has said, I agree with. It's a fundamental legal document. The language that's been used is incredibly sloppy. Terms cannot be defined by government itself and to go before the courts. So that's the first thing. The second major objection we have is the removal of the word woman and removal of the word mother. It's the only time it appears in the Constitution at all is 41.2. Women occurs elsewhere in the Constitution, but this is a chipping away. And as Peadar referred to previous efforts to remove the word woman, we consider very, very dangerous. Thirdly, we really, really, really want to stress, and can't stress enough, that nowhere in the Constitution is it said that a woman's place is in the home. This referendum has been called a woman's place in the home referendum, is what RTE will refer to it all the time, cementing that idea in people's heads. I've spoken to many, many people who have said they believe the Constitution says a woman's place is in the home, and it says nothing of the sort. And of course, it refers to duties, which is language that people object to. I personally don't object to that. We all have duties. We have duties in the home. We have duties in our workplace. Our right to work, women's right to work, men's right to work, to earn a livelihood is protected under Article 45, equally by men and women. It's patently absurd for the National Women's Council of Ireland and others to say that this article has held women back. It has not held women back. Women have equal access, and legislation deals with access, discrimination, employment law. The Constitution is not the place to tackle if these inequalities exist, they cannot be captured under that article. The other major problem with this is the provision of care is actually decreased or diminished. The recognition of the care that is carried out, whether that be by mothers or any carer. The majority of carers are women. It's about 68%. What I find very interesting is between the Census 2016 and Census 2022, there was a 50% increase in the number of people who describe themselves as unpaid carers. So they are carers to generally children with disabilities, adult children with disabilities, elderly relatives, or other relatives. But there was a 50% increase. And it's anticipated that this number is only going to grow for myriad reasons to do with longevity and closing facilities, nursing homes closing down. So care is huge. It's huge. It's not a minority of people. It's going to be even more significant. Financially, it's going to be very, very significant. And as Tom Clonan said on RT Radio this morning, Ireland is the only country in Europe that doesn't have a rights-based approach to disability, and Ireland has refused very recently to sign the UN Convention on the Rights of the Disabled. And again, that's been Roger O'Gorman has been very explicit about that. So when this referendum comes along, diminishing the rights of carers, and let's include mothers in that, one has to be very, very wary of signing into constitutional law effectively a diminishing of the obligations of the state. And I don't want to go on too long, but I do want to say there's a case that was pending in the Supreme Court regarding a mother seeking not to have her carer's allowance means tested for her now adult son with Down syndrome. And her first case in the High Court was thrown out, but it has been fast-tracked past appeals to the Supreme Court, and the 3 justices involved have said that Article 41.2 has never been tested in relation to carer's allowance, and that article, referring to a mother in the home, might well be the article that gives carers back rights and takes away the minister's rights to mean test allowances. So that could have huge ramifications, because that will affect all carers, including mothers or fathers or anyone caring in the home. So that article, one, it protects carers and it protects mothers, and potentially needs to be much further tested, and the state needs to be pushed on actually fulfilling an obligation to have all sorts of carers not have to leave the home for economic necessity when they're full-time caring for any dependents. So we'll watch that one with interest. It was deferred from October, when it was supposed to be heard, and there's something called a remote case hearing coming up on the 14th of February, but the case itself, it looks like, will be post-referendum.
Great.
Wow. What's delayed? We don't know why it's delayed.
There's also issues, isn't it, and a lot of ambiguity about the child benefit, because the child benefit was always paid to the mother.
Yes, well, my understanding of that, and I spoke to several legal people on this, a child, there have been challenges to child benefit in the past, and any attempt to means test child benefit has actually failed. Now, the belief of legal people I've spoken to, because children are protected in the Constitution, all children will be treated equally. It's felt that any attempt now to use this to downgrade child benefit would not succeed. But what will succeed undoubtedly is that because durable relationships are so open, that the person who gets the Christmas card, the Valentine's card, or whatever it is in a deemed to be in a durable relationship, will therefore, if one of that durable relationship is a stay-at-home parent or whatever, is he or she eligible for the tax break, the tax credits, the eye test, the scale and polish, the PRSI, the pension benefits. So if an extra massive percentage of people in durable relationships come looking for their entitlements that married couples have, it's impracticable and unaffordable. What's the state to do? Discriminate against them or pull those brakes altogether? And that, in the view of many senior legal people I spoke to, is a real threat. That is very possible that those tax credits, which again, a lot of couples rely on, could just be removed altogether.
Yeah, well.
We talk about, the people with disabilities. Clon Clunan was very passionate about in the Senate, and also when he was told to sit down, and they stopped the hearing, and then on radio. But Sabine, coming from as an advocate for disabilities, could you just give us briefly what your perception of it all is, coming from a disabilities background?
Well, I think, I'm a person that has fibromyalgia, and I have a disability in my leg from a road traffic accident where I got skin grafts, and I still get infections all the time. And also, I find it very insulting that the National Women's Council are trying to get a yes vote by throwing people with disabilities under the bus. And it's just like, it's nothing got to do with disability. You just want to take out stuff out of the Constitution that's got to do with mothers and women who, by the way, my mother has never been held back by this article. She is a self-employed woman who set up a successful business opening a hardware store, which, is totally, if you want to talk about, crossing sex boundaries, basically, because men were always associated with hardware stores and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that she never had any difficulties when she did start up, but that was got to do with society. It wasn't got to do with the law. And the other thing that I find is that there was only, the debates for this in the House of Oireachtas looked like it was only 2 days each, and I don't think that's enough time to debate something as fundamental as this in our Constitution. It's I also find that, the likes of RTE are being very, very biased when it comes to this. Barely any time is given to anyone who's campaigning on the no side. And we know from referendums in the past, like the marriage equality and the repeal the 8, every one of those people who were on each side were all given opportunities to debate. And I know I haven't seen any public debate being put forward by RTE like there normally is. And I also find it's very, very rushed through. And I just think, I know they're trying to use the thing with lone parent. I'm not a lone parent myself, but I do understand the difficulties that lone parents have. And I do sympathize with them, especially when they hear their kids coming home from school, listening to teachers telling them that they're not families in the Constitution, which, to be honest, I think that's a load of bull, basically. I've never looked down on any lone parent. I say fair play to them. It's a tough job bringing up a child, even if you're in a stable relationship, whether you're married or you're in a partnership. And I just think, using people's vulnerabilities to try and get a yes vote it's just preposterous, really, so.
You mentioned it was rushed through there, and that's a very key point. Peadar, as someone who is in the House of Oireachtas, in the Dáil, what is the consensus in the Dáil that it is being rushed through? And also the fact that they're spending 20 million on this referendum in March, when we're having local and European elections in May, when we could have the referendum vote in May with the locals and the European elections.
Yeah, no, Sabrina makes a valid point there, because normally in the Dáil, what you have is a committee that does pre-legislative scrutiny of a bill to make sure that they go through all elements of the bill to make sure it's decent stuff, and they often bring in different expertise from outside of the Oireachtas to try and tease through elements of the bill. That didn't happen in this situation. Obviously, the government ignored the Citizens' Assembly's suggestions. They ignored the Oireachtas Committee on Equality's suggestion. It seems to me that they couldn't get a decision together at Cabinet and they finally went for, what they thought was bland language that wouldn't necessarily affect change in terms of rights. But what they came up with in terms of the family amendment is such a confused language that it could have significant effect on people's lives, but we just don't know what those effects will be as of yet. As well, I want to say, like, in terms of the issue of women in legislation. So I mentioned earlier, and Helen mentioned this as well. This is a systemic effort that the government have been making over the last number of years in relation to the deletion of the word woman throughout legislation. So, we see where the HSE have started to use language such as, and when they promote cervical check, that they use language of people with the cervix, or they say that people who get pregnant. We know that in schools now, teachers are being advised not to use the word mother or father because they say it's not inclusive, or not to use the words boys and girls because they say it's not inclusive. So this is not an accidental process. This is a systemic process that the government has in an effort to change, the structures of society to a certain extent, and introduce what I would call gender ideology, and a gender ideology which isn't science-based, which is very experimental, and which has significant side effects in terms of both the rights of women and the development of children. So we know, for example, that this government puts 2 male-born sex offenders into a women's prison in Limerick, for example, and only because of the rights, the work of women's rights organisations such as Helen's and the Countess and our own, Aontú's, constant questioning of this in the Dáil. They have semi-reversed, in other words, but they haven't changed the system, but it's kind of they're in a no man's land or a limbo situation currently with that process. But so I think that the government is embarking on a real process of change here. And secondly, I will say this too, that a mother's relationship with a child is a different relationship than a father's relationship. And everybody has been born of a mother, and that level of sacrifice and the danger involved in all of that, and that relationship is is a particular type of relationship that deserves recognition. These politicians will be out on Mother's Day with their tweeting that their mothers are the most special people in the world, and yet they seek to delete that relationship from the Constitution, and I think that's a mistake. Absolutely, fathers often make a fantastic impact, and there are certain situations that fathers raise their children on their own in a really, really positive way, and they should be commended for that. But we should be mature enough as a society to be able to recognize that a mother's relationship with her children and her efforts and her sacrifice is a special one, and it adds a significant benefits to society in relation to that. And I think there's unfortunately, we live in a very ideological space at the moment where people are, critical thinking is being hampered, is being chilled, is being stopped. And, we need to start to push back against it and be able to say things that, maybe we feel are not acceptable in polite company, etc. But, critical thinking is one of the most important elements of a democracy. The competition of ideas are actually one of the most important elements of a democracy. Testing, ideas from other people is key to proper functioning of a democracy. And I think the government thought they would get away without much pushback on this, but I think they're finding that there is significant pushback now in relation to this. The polls are interesting. The polls are showing less than a majority in favor of both amendments. Still, more than those who are against it, but a big block of about 30% who haven't made up their minds as of yet. So I personally think that this is all to play for still in terms of trying to persuade people. And actually, the government might have done themselves a significant disservice because they might have forced people to start to think about all these concepts that many of us have been dealing with for the last number of years. And actually, it might awaken in people that critical thinking which is necessary in a functioning democracy.
Yeah, I would really support that, if you don't mind me saying, Roisin, just to say, just as it occurs to me there, the idea that a woman's work, if it is indeed the woman's work or the mother's work, is somehow demeaning. That has been generally part of the assumption of the culture, but it's not. And we've discovered that very much so, just speaking to people as part of this campaign. As one woman said today, she was actually profiled by Senator Crowell on Twitter. She said, I've given my life 15 years raising my disabled son. I've become a physiotherapist, a speech therapist, a language therapist, everything that she has had to learn to look after a profoundly disabled son. She said, to remove that article, that's my only recognition. That recognition of the work that I have done. And that's what a lot of women are feeling as mothers. To erase that article in the Constitution actually makes it even less recognised that there is value, not just in the raising of children, but in the entire social labour that goes with being at home and part of communities in schools and playgrounds and creches and PTAs and everything else. This is the common good that the Constitution originally referred to. And this is not a backward notion. Community is incredibly important. And the idea, quite frankly, of both parents working around the clock whilst children are raised by strangers is dystopian. And we should be moving away from that and doing everything we can to support better communities, better family.
Yeah. I think if I can just briefly just add to that, I think Helen's dead right. I think that we live in a society now where the only value is our economic output. You know, that nothing else seems to be recognized in terms of and actually I would come from the view that the most valuable things are actually the human relationships that we have. That when it all comes to the end of the day, it's the human relationships that we have is actually the most important element of who we are as human beings within a society. And I think what is part of this is those human relationships in terms of care are being devalued further by these constitutional amendments, by an ideology that does not recognize those values at all. I think that's really unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a housewife myself, like, you know, and you know, like when I first started, like after I graduated from university, like I wasn't really getting anywhere with jobs and stuff like that. But my husband was earning a bit of extra money, so I was able to stay at home. I'm lucky in that sense. But you know, people look down on people like me who have went to university but are now like looking after the house. But people don't realize the other jobs that you do. Like if you've got pets, you're basically their vet. If you are you have to do a budget, so you're basically an accountant. And because I grew up in a hardware store, I know how to fix things when they get broken. So pretty much I could be an engineer if I wanted to be, you know. And also, you know, you have to make sure that there's food in the house and things like that. So there's whole loads of logistics around this. And people always think when you're a housewife, you're automatically chained to the kitchen sink. And that is not always the case. You know, it's just like, you know, people, again, and the other thing that annoys me is that women in power are pushing for this. You know, these are women who've like been educated and they're in high prominent privileged positions in our government and in NGO organizations and things like that, and they're really pushing hard for this and telling us lay women that we are, you know, we're being oppressed by this constitutional article, which is actually not the case at all. Like, so that's my opinion on it anyway. So
yeah, there's a constant reference to Archbishop McQuaid and De Valera, you know, but in fact, I think it was Professor Jeffrey Shannon is the rapporteur on child protection for the government. He said that the Irish Constitution is absolutely unique in its protection of families in terms of longevity of protection of the homemaker. Basically is protected, and it's normally a woman, for the duration of her life in the case of marital breakdown. And we're absolutely unique in that as well. So a lot of these women calling for the deletion of this article as if it's against the interests of women have it upside down. This article is totally and utterly in support of women and in their protection.
Yeah.
And there's another brief point there. The government actually promised in their programme for government to bring about a constitutional amendment to support the right to a home. That obviously never happened, and it's not going to happen now by the looks of things. But in this amendment, they're actually deleting one of the few references to a home. So, I think there's no doubt in my mind that these amendments are not built to strengthen rights, to provide material benefits to people, and to give rights to individuals. And what we're seeing here is an attack on many rights in truth. And Judge Susan Denham made that point very, very clearly, that she said that this particular amendment on the family does not exclude women and mothers from their roles, but actually provides a recognition of that significant role that's played by many, and actually supports that as well. And I think it'll be retrograde to get that out of the Constitution.
I've been referring to it as the referendum of unintended consequences, which are vast. They are vast, and not just in relation to terms such as durable relationships. If those in the absence of any definitions, we cannot anticipate what will happen if even the simple deletion of a word like mother happens, when we're facing into all sorts of laws and new legislation regarding issues like surrogacy. How is baby trafficking going to be affected if we weaken these protections of family, motherhood, childhood, etc. in the Constitution? And I feel that blowing it all away will open us up to a host of issues with regard to things like surrogacy.
I'm worried about that myself, the surrogacy. I think it's baby trafficking. You've also got womb trafficking, and it's a conveyor belt, a baby fat, and then it's just really, it goes into like dark, deep set of the human trafficking and womb trafficking and wombs for sale. And the thing with the surrogacy is to that mother-baby bond before the baby's even born. That's so unique. That's for another program, and we'll talk about that in another program. We have 2 minutes left before Peadar has to hop off to prime time tonight. So Peadar, maybe if you could give us, maybe we'll all go through three of you very quickly. What would be your last word to the voters from your perspective about the referendum?
I would say to voters, take your time to research these amendments. I think it would be in the government's interest if there's apathy, if people don't bother with this referendum, if they ignore this referendum. And I think low turnout would probably suit the government in terms of this. So first of all, engage with this, and then look at the issues. Look at very clearly in relation to, do you understand what a durable relationship is? Can you find anybody in government who can tell you what a durable relationship is? And if nobody seems to know what a durable relationship is, well then how can you in good conscience vote for that inclusion into the Constitution? And the second issue there is the issue of care. Care is an extremely important aspect of our society. And, there are at least 500,000 people involved in care on a daily basis in the state. And they are entitled to rights, and they are entitled to supports. This care amendment does nothing for those. It actually insulates the government against having to be responsible to provide supports for these individuals. It is a very watered down version of what is in existence currently. And I would ask people to vote against that amendment as well.
And Helen, from the Irish Women's Lobby, what would your last words?
I would say I would ask people just to ask questions. Why is this being sought? What are the outcomes? Look at the claims being made by the Yes lobby. They're very shallow claims of what this is going to actually mean for the real daily lives of carers, mothers, and families. So I'd say ask question, what is it going to achieve? Why now? Why is it being pushed? Why was there no legislative scrutiny? Why are the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly and the Oireachtas Committee being ignored? Why did the Seanad have 2 days to turn around? Why there are so many questions apart from the definitions. I can't think for anyone looking in and asking these questions, is there any one good reason to vote yes? And I cannot see one.
No. And it's the fact that it's rushed through the very, very ambiguous wording, and there's no debating at the moment. There's a lot of censorship on the mainstream media. I mean, there's just so many questions, and the cancelling of women. Sabine, what would be very quickly your last words to the voters from your perspective?
Well, I agree with what Helen is saying, 100%. Also, if those people are in the don't know category and they still don't know on voting day, I'm going to use the phrase that my father uses: if you don't know, vote no. So that's my opinion on it anyway.
Helen, just before we go to you, had a very successful silence protest outside the Mansion House in Dublin, which is very successful at the launch of the National Women's Council's launch of their Yes campaign. Very successful on your part. Tell us briefly about that.
Well, the Silence Protest is an umbrella organisation for several women's groups to unite together on particular issues. So we came together on the first issue was to remove men from women's prisons. So 2 sex offenders have been housed with women in Limerick prison, and we have very successfully brought attention to that, and with the result that parliamentary questions have been asked, and a result is now pending, but there has been significant pushback in the Dáil. The second reason the silence protest came together, again, this group of women, is to fight this referendum. And we had our launch of our Vote No campaign on the same day as the National Women's Council of Ireland had their Vote Yes campaign in the Mansion House, publicly funded. The National Women's Council is 85% government funded. So it's launched the referenda, and it's strictly against referendum rules that government lobbies and pays to secure a specific outcome. So this is clearly in contravention of the rules to use a government-funded organisation. So the women who are concerned about the outcome and the effect on women's rights and children's rights were actually on the street outside the Mansion House, and we think this spoke volumes. And the fair representation is not happening in the media. It's not happening anywhere for the No campaign. So this is a very, very, very one-sided debate that we have never seen before in a referendum, where the yes and no are not being equally represented, and there's 3 or 4 weeks to go. Quite worrying. So we will be stepping up our campaign, and we'll be looking for that support from media and from government.
Yeah.
And sorry, Paul.
And Helen, just as a kind of a slight little aside, but it's still very, very important. Like the debates that we're having, we have hate speech legislation that is coming down the tracks. If that is passed, conversations like this could be potentially shut down, which would be, fundamentally wrong. Surely, if something like this does come into play, it's voices like yours are going to be censored, and that's not right.
Yes, and I have no doubts. I have no doubts that voices like ours will be censored. Absolutely no doubts. We've seen it. We've seen it in countries where hate speech laws have not even been enacted yet, but they've been enacted in the spirit of the pending law has been adopted. In the UK, we see police arresting protesters, arresting women who are praying on the side of the street, arresting women for social media posts which say men cannot be women or no men in women's sports, things like that. We've seen, so even we have hate crime laws, but there's specific hate speech laws not yet in place, but there's a chilling effect in place already where people are frightened to speak up. They see what's happening in other countries, Canada, Australia, the US. We've seen just this week a Newcastle United FC supporter, has been suspended as a supporter for expressing gender critical. That means she doesn't believe men can be women. She's expressed that on media, and she's been suspended by a football club. So the Premier League actually has an espionage unit, and it reserves the right to censor its own fans for their political beliefs. So we don't need hate speech laws to be enacted. They're in effect already. I got letters from Jennifer McNeil, sorry, I mix up her name, various ministers saying, I said, can I stand outside the Dáil and say no males in women's jails? Can I stand outside the Dáil with a sign that says women don't have penises? They have replied to me and said they're confident that the hate speech bills would not prevent me from doing that. But there is no way they can make those claims at all. So Michael McDowell, former Attorney General, one of the most senior legal minds in the country, says this language cannot safeguard against you and your freedom of expression at all. But TDs have no problem putting it in writing. I'm confident that you'll be able to do that. No, we won't. We won't be able to do that. And we won't be able to do this.
Wow.
I actually met with Catherine Murphy about the hate speech laws. She was saying it's up to the DPP whether to prosecute. And I was just like, but if people overhear a conversation in the pub and people are having the crack, as we all do in Ireland, and we're slagging off each other and various different things, and people, I said, does that mean that like we say a joke and someone overhears and gets offended by it? And I'm so sick of people being offended by stuff. It's just ridiculous. Like, get a life. But anyway, like she was saying, it was up to the DPP to prosecute and go forward. And I was just there going, so does this mean because what's written here in the law, like it's up to the DPP, so he might prosecute some cases, but he mightn't prosecute your case? So what, like, it just seems a bit haphazardy if you ask me, you know?
Well, it's designed for that chilling effect because nobody wants to be that case that is prosecuted by the DPP. So it just has a general chilling effect, and criticism stops dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose the fact that in the legislation it doesn't define actually what hate is, that really just opens so many doors that could be, you know, could have a lot of negative consequences.
Yeah.
And I wish they start using sex instead of gender, you know? Gender is a social construct made up by people, you know. It's like,
well, again, I think
stick with the biological terms, which is sex, male, female, you know.
It may be there are issues there in this referendum that may be linked. It's only conjecture, but the GRA 2015 Gender Recognition Act uses sex and gender interchangeably, which really makes a nonsense of the law itself. Male will become the sex of a woman, and sex is immutable, but they managed to pass a law using those two terms interchangeably, which is extraordinary. So I feel that there could be a link once words like mother and woman are taken out of the Constitution. That might be a further weakening or a further cementing of those interchangeability of those terms elsewhere in legislation.
And even the term violence against women has now gone gender-based violence. So
yes, yeah.
That is very dangerous too, because women are not going to report violence, a domestic violence case, if it becomes a gender-based violence. You know, they're even taking that away from women who are living with domestic violence, domestic abuse, or rape, the gender-based violence. I mean, it takes that away from women. And it makes it very vague, gender-based violence. You know, there can be violence against men, but that is, you know, male violence against men or male violence. And then you have the violence against women. And I think there's only one TD, or she's an MEP now, that is only saying, who's still using the word violence against women. That's Frances Fitzgerald. And I just tweeted, she was on Instagram, and I just said last night, thank you for still using the terms violence against women, because that is, I think that's very dangerous to take that away when women are being violated in their own homes, need help, and it's been turned around again to taking away the woman out of the violence.
It's being neutered. Quite
Actually,
taking it away, like taking mothering away from women as well. It's divesting meaning from the word woman, and divesting and pulling asunder words that go together, such as mothers are women, women are mothers, and pulling those asunder, which will render everything a little bit meaningless and everything open to interpretation through a gender lens.
Yeah, but it's all also been indoctrinated in universities and stuff. I remember my final year in university, and I graduated in 2018 in Maynooth, and I just remember everything was like, this was the first time I heard the word cis, right? And I'm like, oh, and then I hear gender-based violence, and I was just like, well, what the hell is that? Like, it's like, I thought it was more violence against women that people would discuss, especially like of women's age used to do. But they seem to have gone as well. Like, but it's it's coming from the universities as well. Like, and people say to me, "Would you not go back and do a master's?" And go, "Why would I want to go back to that?" I said it was getting really woke. I could hate to see what it's like today, especially since I've seen some tweets from some professors in the sociology department. I'm like, what? Like, honestly, like, wanting to silence gripped media.
Yes.
Like, you shouldn't want to silence any media, regardless of their own biases and stuff like that. And I also think media shouldn't be held behind especially when it comes to articles about the referendum, they shouldn't have those articles behind a paywall. I think they should be free to the public to actually read them, because it is important information, regardless of what side they're talking about. Because I've noticed that a lot of the, especially the Yes campaign ones, they're all behind a paywall. So I'm like, I want to find out what they're saying, as well as what the no side are saying. But I'm still voting no, because I'm still not convinced for the yes. So there you go.
That is actually a very good point you make, that, during referendums, that articles be either yes, for or against, they shouldn't be behind a paywall. Everyone should have all access to all information and be able to make a fair and informed decision. So I think that's
I notice
really,
also
really interesting.
Also, people I've been talking to, they don't even have the booklet yet being posted out to them, because a lot of people are like, well, what's this referendum about? And I was talking to 2 separate taxi drivers, and they didn't even know about the referendum. And I'm just like, and even my own father at the big when the Yes campaign was starting to get the ball rolling, he didn't even know about the referendum, and he watches the news all the time on RTE. Unfortunately, that's where he gets his news from. Like, but like, he's not really into going onto computers or going online. So, but he didn't even know there was a referendum coming up, and he's a very, very political person. Like, so.
And Helen, where do you see this going within the next month, when there's so much, when your experience within the media, within politicians, and even with referendums before, you used to be people canvassing at the door, were voting. I know Paul and I were when we were both members of the Labour Party, we used to be out canvassing. So as Peadar said, there doesn't seem to be much interest from politicians, but they're all pushing it. And the media are censoring, interviewing people on the radio, but not putting the interview up on their website or on SoundCloud. So where is this going to go in the next month?
Honestly, I just do not know. I do not know. I know from previous campaigns that the marketing and promotion would have started well by now. There isn't even a big online campaign coming from the government. So I agree with everything Sabine was saying there about censorship of there's a lot of censorship of the no side going on. I see quite a bit of yes, campaigning in the media, in the Irish Times, etc., but it's still very low key and targeting a very specific kind of audience. So Peadar is saying that a low turnout would suit government. I guess that's the route they're taking, that they mobilise enough of the kind of NGO sector. Roger O'Gorman, as you know, threatened the NGO sector, who didn't, progressive NGOs that were not going to come out in support, again, in complete contravention of the rules, and they have come out in force, all the NGOs. So is it going to be a kind of a public sector vote with a very low turnout, suppress the no side? But I think that with the polls now showing such a large, I mean, it's really reflected in the 30% plus who are undecided. They're undecided because of the lack of information. I think that the way for us to proceed on the no side is the grassroots getting the word out. The mechanisms such as this, meetings, podcasts, social media. And that's what we have at our disposal, and we have to reach that cohort that are impervious to the government line.
I remember when I was doing my media degree, and I was studying Arab women in the media, and that's what it said, that it's the Arab Spring, and the Arab women used the social media, and that the power of social media is equally as powerful, if not more, than the mainstream media. And it's been said many, many times that, you know, through various reasons, journalists are either being silenced, they're not allowed, editors are censoring what they want to write. But citizen journalism is really coming to the forefront now. People actually going on their phones, and actually reporting what is happening, just like the silenced protest up in Dublin outside the Mansion House, that people were on the phone, they were tweeting about it, they were doing videos, and then members of the public were saying, what's going on over there? You know, so
yeah, so it's different, and maybe we could say it's different. I mean, is it different to repeal in that sense, that social media was a massive factor, but that's a different, it's very different when the majority is on one side, unlike this. So it's very, very hard to call. I thought when the Seanad had to return its findings it was Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday the 7th of February, was that the 7th? It was a Tuesday anyway.
February.
And the belief then was that there was, from Wednesday, the government was going to launch their campaign from Wednesday, and they would have a clear run to March the 8th. But it just didn't happen. And the NWCI launch was low key and poorly attended. I mean, I think we got as much media coverage, really. And just the numbers, I reckoned a kind of a rough head count. I thought there were possibly 100 people at that launch, which is very, very small numbers. Labour Party were present, but I didn't see anyone from Sinn Féin, anyone from Fianna Fáil, anyone from Fine Gael, no one there. So very, very low profile. So I'm flummoxed, really.
And I know this is going to be, you don't have to answer, ladies, if you don't think so. Do you think is the NCBI, National Women's Council of Ireland, has it now got conflict of interest? Is it now, you know, is there an issue where they're not who they are, who they say they are on the tin? They're not representing the women of Ireland. They're representing themselves and the government, and whoever's funding them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the case with all NGOs, really, isn't it? I mean, they're completely misnamed. They're not non-governmental organizations. They're governmental organizations, as long as the majority of their income is from government, of course. So, I mean, the Irish Women's Lobby was established directly to counter the fact that the National Women's Council of Ireland is not representing a huge amount of women, and that started off as the women who don't believe men can be women and wouldn't put a man on their board saying he's a woman.
Yeah.
And so even on that alone, where they are not representing probably most women in Ireland.
Yeah, actually, I've seen a Gripped Media. It just been released there today. And it's called an in-depth look into the funding of Ireland's largest NGO, which is about the National Women's Council, and they have an in-depth look of the costs, and they get funding from the HSE, and apparently 96% of the NCWI staffing costs have been paid for directly by grants from the government and HSE departments. That's just one quote, but read the article. It's just like, you know, they are funded by the government, and they keep saying that we're a non-government organization, but when they're paying over 90% of the bill for their staff, I'm just like, so what, like, you are part of the government.
Yeah. And all their pay scales are linked to the public service as well.
I mean, 33,000 NGOs.
Yeah.
33,000 NGOs delivering what government wants.
Yes.
They're
certainly getting their message out there. The government are certainly getting their message out there through NGOs, or delivering the message, influencing through their messaging to the general public exactly what the government wants them to do.
There's something else I should add, and that is a lot of the funding of NGOs, especially larger NGOs such as Amnesty International, come from philanthropic organizations, often the US, the One Foundation. Huge amounts of funding goes into Amnesty International, and it's on the back of campaigns that those organizations want it to run. So we have government and international organizations, and as Peadar Tóibín will often say, 70% of our legislation is supranational. So in effect, our national government is acting like a local county council, really, in that it's enacting a small minority of laws. Most things are coming from abroad. So with the National Women's Council, as Sabine said, 85% or 96% of staff costs coming from government. All of these NGOs then will have further funding from groups that are ideological. And when Amnesty International switched away completely from defending political prisoners of conscience, onto issues, social issues, abortion, equal marriage, sex workers, in inverted commas, prostitution rights. These are all dictated from these foundations that are paying it. Who pays the piper, plays the tune, etc. So it's all very, very, very undemocratic. It's very, very undemocratic.
Well, maybe we should do a programme on the funding and the NGOs, especially when there's 33,000 NGOs here in Ireland. We're just a little small island of what, 5 to 6,000 million people? 5 to 6 million people? Is that including the North as well? Am I sure I'm very biased there?
They're about, if you were to put it in comparison, Ireland is, the whole island of Ireland is about the same size population-wise as Greater Manchester.
Yeah. And we got 33,000, and there's something wrong there, and you know and there's a lot of taxpayer money going that direction. Well, we've come to a close. We really would love to thank you both, Helen Duignan, Sabine, Devine, and Peadar Tóibín, for coming on today. You know, there's a lot more programs that could come out of this one program itself, but we really do thank you for taking the time of your busy day to come and talk to the Irish Political Roundup today. Thank you so much. Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much. It's been really educational. Certainly. Before tonight's program, I wasn't 100% sure on what the referendum was, what it was covered, and it's been really an eye opener, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us here on the program. It's been a massive help to me.
Great, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And Paul, we could have a little joke here. You and I have known one another since 2011. We're in the Labour Party together. We're in the media together. We're doing this together. We could say we're a dual relationship, and I'm afraid your girlfriend won't like that. But you know what?
I know she was. We might have to edit this bit out.